Okay, so balancing chemical equations. We already have the rules, but irrespective, it is all based on counting. I always tell people, as long as you can count, balancing chemical equations should not be difficult for you, because all you're counting is, you're counting the left-hand side, you're counting the right-hand side, and you're making sure that everything is equal. All based on the law of conservation of mass. So the first thing is that in a chemical equation, we have two sides, the left-hand side and the right-hand side. The left-hand side, the reactants, the right-hand side is what we call the products. So in my counting, I'm first of all going to identify what I'm counting from the reactants and then what I'm counting from the product side. Again, take note, in a chemical equation, definitely and most likely, any atom you find on the left-hand side, you will find the same atom on the right-hand side. So therefore, sulfur and oxygen from the reactant side, and we also have sulfur and oxygen on the product side. You are trying to balance the chemical equation, making sure that all the atoms are the same. So it's not going to be possible that some atoms will go missing. So all atoms must be the same. Now we talk about the number. So the first thing is that in an equation, this subscript affects only the element that it is directly in front of. So this 2 here now belongs only to oxygen. It does not affect sulfur. So on the reactant side, sulfur we have 8. And for oxygen, we have 2. On the product side, no number directly in front of sulfur. That means 1. And then the oxygen, we have 2. Now, I'm going to rewrite the reaction. I'm going to balance it here. The first one we have at the top is the question. So we have S8 plus O2 gives SO2. All right, so now, all you basically do is make the smaller number become the bigger number, and you do so by multiplication. That's an easy way to do it. So, I have 1 here, and I have 8 here. I need to make 1 become 8. How do I do that? Simply multiply by 8. So what did I do? From the product side, I multiplied sulfur by 8. So I simply go to the product side, the place where I have sulfur, I place 8 there. Now remember, balancing is not just once. You have to recount. It may just be one step, but you have to recount and make sure that when you balance one, it did not affect the other. Just like what we have here, and you observe that as we balance sulfur, it is going to affect oxygen. How? Sulfur here is 8 now. No number here, it means 1. So we have 8. Sulfur is now balanced. But look at oxygen. Oxygen here now is now 8 times 2. So oxygen is no longer 2. Oxygen is now actually 16. That's why you must recount after each step. However, on the reactant side, oxygen still remains 2. So now we have to make 2 become 16. How do we do that? We multiply by 8. So now what did I do? I multiplied oxygen on the reactant side by 8. So I simply go to where I have oxygen on the reactant side and I put an 8 there. Now if you check through, this reaction is balanced. Moving on to the second example. Remember the suggestion when balancing chemical equations. Any atom that appears in 2 places on the same side, that atom should be balanced last. So you see oxygen on the product side. It appears in carbon dioxide and it appears in water on the same side. So that's going to be the last thing I balance. It helps because as you are balancing other atoms, it will affect the oxygen. Then you know just one final thing to balance. Or if you balance oxygen first, when you start balancing other atoms, it begins to affect the oxygen all over again. So you might start having issues. You have to start counting and counting and counting. So to avoid that stress, whatever appears in 2 places on the same side, either on the product or on the reactant side, make sure that is the last thing you balance. So in this case, I'll be balancing oxygen last. So once again, I have my reactant side and I have my product side. The elements, I have carbon, I have hydrogen, and I have oxygen. And as I've already said, you are going to have exactly the same thing on the product side, the same atoms. I have carbon, I have hydrogen, and I have oxygen. So now it's all about how many of these atoms do I have. If you look through, carbon here is just 1. We have 4 hydrogen, and we have 2 oxygens. On the product side, we have just 1 carbon. We have 2 hydrogens. You can see the subscript affects only the elements directly in front of it. So we have 2 hydrogens. And then for oxygen, remember on the product side, so you are adding everything on the product side. We have 2 from here and we have 1 from here. So our oxygen becomes 2 plus 1. So we have a total of 3 oxygens. So again, I'm going to rewrite the chemical reaction. Balancing it at the bottom. So we have CH4, that's methane, plus O2 gives CO2 plus H2O. Alright, so now if you observe, carbon is balanced 1-1. That means we are not touching carbon. What is not balanced? First we have hydrogen. I'm balancing oxygen last, as we have already mentioned. So I have to make 2 become 4. To do that, I multiply 2 by 2. That means I multiplied hydrogen on the product side by 2. So I simply go to where I have hydrogen on the product side and place my 2 there. So I recount again. Now to save you time when recounting, you only have to recount the particular compound that you balanced and the elements affected. So I don't go and count carbon again because carbon is not affected. But I have to count hydrogen and I have to count oxygen. Because when I put a number here, it will affect hydrogen and it will affect oxygen. So I only count that particular compound. So in this case, hydrogen now is 4, which means hydrogen is balanced. But oxygen now will no longer be 3. Why? Because now we have 2 here, and now 2 times 1, 2. So we also have 2 oxygens here. So that means that it is no longer 2 plus 1. Instead, oxygen is now 2 from carbon dioxide plus 2 that we have from water. So oxygen is now total of 4. So now I have 2 oxygens on the reactant side and I have a total of 4 oxygens on the product side. I have to make the smaller one become the bigger one. So what do I do? To make 4, I multiply 2 by 2 and that gives 4. So automatically, I multiplied oxygen on the reactant side by 2. So I simply go to where I have oxygen on the reactant side and I place a 2 there. So this becomes my answer. If you count everything again, you find that everything is balanced. So that is simply how you balance chemical reactions. In further videos, we'll be getting much more complex examples. But the fact is, once you get these concepts, you have gotten exactly how to balance chemical reactions. So watch out for the next video. Here we'll continue to have more examples.